Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariam Zaidi, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome everyone to an online policy debate for the MEPs Against Cancer Interest Group, or MAC. Now, today, we're going to be discussing a crucial aspect of an EC policy overhaul. How can the reform of the EU pharmaceutical legislation improve cancer patients' access to treatments? Cancer, as we know, is a very cruel disease. In Europe, around 2.7 million people are diagnosed with cancer every year. And as we can imagine, that number will only keep growing. We all know someone who has been affected by, or perhaps even we ourselves have had a brush for this awful disease in one of its many forms. It is still today one of the leading causes of death in the EU, accounting for around 23% of the total number of deaths in the bloc. Now, I know that kicking off this debate with some sobering facts, it isn't to scare the audience away, believe me. It's to show the magnitude of the problem that we are facing. The intention is to shape the discussion around a very important word: access. Because it's only with better access to medicines and therapies can the outcomes of cancer patients be improved. So why MAC? Well, founded in 2005, the MAC interest group is one of the largest and one of the oldest groups dedicated to cancer policy at the European Parliament. It has around 128 cross-party members across 25 member states. And that collaboration allows MAC to help improve cancer outcomes and prevention across Europe. ECL, the Association of European Cancer Leagues, has been supporting MAC since 2010. So to the question then, you're all maybe wondering, why discuss cancer and the pharma legislation? Well, in general terms, the pharma legislation is an opportunity to improve access, availability, and affordability of medicines, treatments, innovative devices that could improve the health of Europeans. It's one of the obvious objectives as well, is to incentivize the pharma industry to innovate, but also to improve medicine supply, the affordability of medicines, and support national pricing systems, and also to create a better environment for that very important thing, clinical trials. So given all of that, the reform could be part of a wider strategy, perhaps, to tackle cancer. Now, everyone on this call will know that the unmet medical needs of cancer patients remains really high. What this means is that cancers have no targeted, only limited treatment options available. Patients want and deserve better, but is this a legislative change that will improve their outcomes? Now, we're going to be debating that shortly with the amazing panelists who we have lined up. But first, let me go through some of today's debate flow. So to our agenda then. I'm going to shortly hand over to Green MEP Tilly Metz. She's the Vice Chair of the MAC Group for some opening remarks. I'll then open up the debate. It's going to be about 45 minutes or so with our great panelists. And then, audience, we're going to move on to a Q&A with all of you. And then after that, we'll do a quick wrap up. But before I kick things off with our MEP, here's some housekeeping. This webinar, if you haven't realized, is being recorded. Audience, please do keep your camera off and your microphones muted, especially if you're munching on perhaps a bag of crisps or some snacks as you engage in this wonderful debate of ours. We do, as I was saying, have a Q&A function, so you can be a part of this debate. We want it to be as interactive as possible. So submit your questions for the panelists, and I'm going to be coming to that after the panelist debate. We'll give you about 15 minutes or so, or perhaps we might even give you some more if you put in lots of questions, so keep that in mind. You can also use a chat function to interact with other participants and organisers, and most importantly, perhaps for the socially media savvy of us, if you want to start a conversation on your socials, use the hashtags Let's Talk Access or Access to Medicines. And just to add that, of course, I am going to give the floor back to the panelists to wrap up any final thoughts of theirs as well in the last few minutes of our debate. Okay, so with that, it's my pleasure then to hand over to MEP Tilly Metz. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marie. Yeah, is everything so good to see so many of you joining today. And as vice chair of the MEPs Against Cancer interest group, I would like to welcome you all to this policy debate. It's such a pleasure to discuss the revision of the EU pharmaceutical legislation exactly when we are nearing the end of the negotiations in the parliament. Negotiations have not been easy until now, and I hope we will be able to find a compromise that benefits first and foremost the patients. Why? Because in Europe, and it was said by Mariam, around 2.7 million people are diagnosed with cancer every year. Unfortunately, they are faced with unacceptable reality. This reality leaves them often without access to necessary treatment, or means they are only provided with limited treatment options. In the majority of cases, this reality is a product of two main problems. First of all, skyrocketing prices of new medicine, which are becoming more and more unaffordable for public health systems, as well as new medicines entering the market with questionable added value for patient, which means, yes, treatment is available, but after 5, 10, or even 15 years, we discover that there is no real benefit for patient. I want to call it like meaningless innovation. Now, I want to remind all of us about a great legacy we have thanks to the work of the BICA committee. We have the European Parliament's resolution also on fight against cancer adopted in 2022. One of its chapters is fully dedicated to equal access to cancer care. It addresses many important issues such as decreasing competition in the pharmaceutical market, affecting SMEs and benefiting only big pharmaceutical companies. It addresses also medicine shortages and the importance of the European approach to health technology assessment, as well as pricing and reimbursement policies. Building on the BICA report, I believe that to make the European pharmaceutical system beneficial for patients, we cannot focus only on small adjustment, but we have to change our overall approach. That's why I am a strong advocate of increasing transparency on R&D funding, and also on reduced baseline for regulatory data protection. And I support system of modulated incentives. I also support an obligation to file for pricing and reimbursement in all member states for centrally authorized medicines. And lastly, I want to do more on medicine shortages, as current system is too risky to rely on. So as an introduction, I want to stop here, but let me say once again that I'm very happy and honored to host this debate, and I look forward to our fruitful discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, MEP Metz. I made a few notes of some of the issues that you raised there, so we'll come back to those later. And just to tell the audience that MEP Metz, of course, rejoins us in now the panel debate, because she's also the shadow rapporteur for the pharma legislation. So thank you as well for now putting on your other hat and joining us in this debate. So let's kick off this debate then. Okay, well, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce the audience to our great panelists. We have from the European Commission, we have Lilia Luciano. She's a policy officer at DG Sante. Great to have you on the panel. I've been with Lilia on panels before. She's a great panelist. Thank you so much. Of course, we have MEP Tilly Metz, as I was saying. She's the vice chair of the MEPs Against Cancer interest group, and also the shadow rapporteur of this key legislation that we are debating the merits of in terms of cancer care and access to medicines. Next, we have Dr. Wood Rommel. He's the chair of Access to Medicines Task Force at the Association of European Cancer Leagues, ECL. So great to have ECL in our panel as well. And last but never least, we have Julie Spooney. She's the policy officer at the European Patients Forum. So great to have someone who is really fully just advocating and going to be looking at things from the perspective of patients as well. So welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us on this online debate. We really appreciate you being with us. I'll give you all the floor now to say a few words about yourselves, your organizations, what you advocate for. The floor is yours, Lilia.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I work at the Commission, DG Santé indeed, and I was in charge of the of the legislation, so the drafting and now the negotiations indeed in the Parliament and in the Council. And so I'm very, well aware of the situation as described and the main issues that MEP Telemet's already mentioned. So my points today are really going to be the following, to show you how the proposed legislation is actually really going to the direction that was outlined, to organize a system, to update a system that has not been really updated in 25 years in a way that it allows at the same time for access in terms of new innovative medicines coming to the market, but at the same time going to all the patients that actually needed that, not being superficial, I may be paraphrasing what Telemet said, but not being unnecessary evolutions, but really truly needed medicines, so medicines targeting the unmet medical need, and at the same time ensuring that there is enough money in the budgets to cover the needs of the patients that are increasing. We know that the demographical situation is making it harder and harder for budgets, and the prices indeed are sometimes skyrocketing. So what we need with this legislation is to ensure both access and affordability for the health budgets. That's why we have several measures. One was already mentioned, the modulation of incentives, that is also at the heart of the discussions and long debates. I will explain a bit as well all of the other measures that we have in the legislation that are meant to make innovation happen while keeping the budgets, sane. And the last point that I wanted to say as well is that we try to make budgets sane also through other little measures that sometimes have a big impact, and I will, if I'm given the floor, I will explain to you a bit more about that as well. So that was my introductory remark. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Lily, and thanks for outlining, the approach that the Commission has taken with this. And I think always when we have these discussions, it's always great to have someone from the Commission on the panel, but also for everyone to remember that, the Commission sometimes perhaps gets a bit of a hard job from every different sector and every interested party. They're trying to find a balanced approach, but let's see if the rest of the panelists do believe that that approach is balanced enough. Okay, over now to the representative of our other institution, MEP Telemet, as I was saying, is a shadow rapporteur for this legislation. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much again, Mariam, for giving me the floor. I would like to use this time to explain a little bit my position on the whole pharmaceutical package. I have to say that this revision will not solve, of course, all the challenges we have, but it can certainly help to address many of them. First, I would like to say we need, and I said it already in my introduction, more transparency of the R&D cost. What I mean is we have to include all public funding, as well as the tax breaks and also the philanthropic funding. Only this way we will have almost a full picture of the support provided to the development of new medicine. Second, and it was also said by Lilia, modulation of incentive is crucial in my view, as it will help us to steer also innovation to address unmet medical needs and to achieve meaningful innovation for the benefit of the patient. However, we should be strategic about the incentive and design them in a way that really helps and not provide free exclusivities for nothing. Third, I believe to improve availability of medicine in all member states, the pharmaceutical companies should be obliged to file for pricing and reimbursement everywhere. This needs to be done in good faith to achieve an acceptable outcome for both the industry and the health system. And lastly, on medicine shortages, I strongly support the extension of the notification periods, as well as the shortage prevention plans for all medicines. In current system, authorities do not have enough information, neither the powers to tackle this issue properly. And we know it's getting worse, and everybody can experience that. I also look forward, I must say, to a future Critical Medicine Act. And I hope it will include a strong public stewardship component. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. And next we'll go over to our representative from the ECL, Dr. Ward Rommel.
Thank you. So I represent the Task Force Access to Medicines of the European Cancer Leagues. European Cancer Leagues represents 32 cancer societies from 27 countries. I myself, I'm working at the Flemish Cancer Society in Belgium, and these cancer societies all have a comparable mission. So we want to improve cancer prevention. For example, this includes banning tobacco from society. We also want to improve cancer treatment. So many societies, cancer societies also support, for example, biomedical research. And we also want to improve quality of life of cancer patients, for example, by supporting return to work programs, by supporting psychosocial care programs. But then, of course, it's also important for cancer societies that patients have access to new medicines and new treatments which have a clear clinical benefit. And because this is a challenge nowadays in Europe, in 2016, within ECL, the Task Force Access to Medicines was established. And the mission of this task force is to make safe and effective medicines available to all cancer patients in Europe. And it was already mentioned by other speakers today that this is not yet really a reality. So, for example, for some cancers, there is still a high unmet need. Like just to take a few examples, some types of leukemia, brain tumors, pancreatic cancer, we still have a very low survival there. So we need new treatments. We also see that our members have not got equal access to new treatments. Some countries in Europe have less access than other countries. They have later access than other countries. So inequality in Europe is a problem. We also see the challenge of prices. So, for example, now we have the new generation of cell therapies where new treatments often cost more than 1 million euros per treatment. And we are also worried about the added value of new cancer drugs. So recently there was a journal article in the British Medical Journal where we see that a lot of new treatments coming to the market have not got a clear clinical benefit. So this is also a very big concern for us, is that when new treatments come to the market, they should have a real clinical benefit, and there should be good evidence for that. So we see these challenges. And then, of course, the pharma legislation, the EU pharma legislation, we think is a very important piece of the puzzle to tackle these challenges. Of course, it cannot solve everything because there are several elements that are still national competencies, for example, the reimbursement of drugs. So this cannot be tackled on the EU level, but nevertheless, the EU pharma legislation is a very important piece of the puzzle. And then if we look at the Commission proposal, there we have, but ECL, we looked at it thoroughly and we have quite a nuanced view on the proposal of the Commission. We think some ideas, some articles in this proposal are really a progress. With some other, we have some questions about other articles. So, but maybe we can discuss this later on. But just to give two examples, when it comes to the incentives, we also support the idea of reducing the basic period of data protection, but then extending this basic period if there are specific conditions fulfilled. For example, if the drug is launched in every EU country. And then what we also like is in the current proposal is the fact that there are incentives and also support for more for academic development of drugs, and also for not-for-profit, for the place of not-for-profit organizations in drug development, because we also think that we should not be completely dependent on commercial development of new treatments. So these are just some of our ideas about the legislation, and we can further discuss other ideas of ECL in this conversation, I think.
Okay, thank you so much, Gord. And don't worry, there is a question coming to you on, as you're saying, those data provisions, and we will, of course, allow Lilia to write a reply on those. I do think you're a bit brave in talking about banning tobacco. I think that is potentially, that's something that we do need to talk about. It's perhaps outside the ambit of this discussion specifically, but it's definitely something that we need to look at, because it's, we can increase the prices of tobacco, but the availability is always still there. And I did like what you said about returning to work programs. That sounds really fantastic. So we'll get into all of that, and especially, the work that needs to be done on finding solutions for blood cancers like leukemia. But first of all, we'll go to our last panelist, Julie. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mariam, and hello, everyone. So my name is Julie Sponi, and today I represent the European Patients Forum. So we are an umbrella patient organization of patient organizations across Europe and across disease areas. We have 79 members, and they include disease-specific patient organizations at EU level and national umbrella patient organizations. And we have been very engaged on the revision of the legislation, because it's crucial for the communities we represent, given its impact on patient involvement in the regulatory process or the impact on patient access to medicines. Because one of our key priorities is really to ensure that all patients in the EU have access to high quality, patient-centered and timely healthcare, which include medicines. And this isn't news, but for many patients living with chronic disease, especially cancer patients, medicines are an essential part of their treatment. They offer the promise of a significant improvement in health or on quality of life, and sometimes even a cure. And before we kick off the discussion, I would like to give you EPF's definition on access to medicines. So we are all on the same page, and so we can consider these elements in the discussion. At EPF, we define access to medicines according to 5 principles, or based on 5 A's, as I like to say. So the first one is availability. The medicine needs to be available in the market. The second principle is affordability. Patients should not suffer financial hardship as a result of seeking treatment, and healthcare systems should not suffer financial hardship as a result of seeking to provide treatment for their citizens. The third principle is adequacy. The medicine should be safe, of high quality and effective. The fourth principle is appropriateness. The medicine needs to be appropriate for patients' needs. And the last but definitely not least principle is accessibility. The medicine should be distributed through reachable channels without geographical or time barriers. Of course, and as it was said by the different panelists, not everything can be addressed through the pharma legislation. But at EPF, we think that the revision is an opportunity to work on these different aspects and improve patient access to medicines. And I look forward to discussing this important issue with you today. I hand over the floor back to you, Mariam.
Thank you so much. And thank you for outlining those 5 principles that you have at your organization. And on the back of that, then, I mean, you talked about, the 5 most important principles. I'll then open up a sort of question to all the panelists. We'll start with Lilia first. If we're talking about improving, access to, cancer treatments for cancer patients all across the EU. I mean, I know that, you obviously helped create this legislation as well, this proposal. But what would you say, in your perspective, and this is a question for the panelists then, is the one thing that we can do, the one thing that this legislation can do, needs to do, if we are to improve the outcomes for cancer patients and their ability to access the treatments that they need? Lilia?
Yes, I'm afraid there is no one thing. That has to be indeed a list of several things that put one to one next to each other will achieve the outcome. From the discussions that we already have, we can see that it's not an easy issue, because we have to distinguish the situations. For the patients who do not yet have a treatment, or for who the treatment is simply too dangerous or not efficacious, we need to have that treatment. So there needs to be innovation. There needs to be a new product put on the market. For the patients where the product has already been put on the market, but for some reason there is a shortage, there is yet another issue. For some other patients, even though the medicine exists and it has been put on the EU market, it doesn't reach their country, so they have a different sort of access issue. And then, of course, we can have the issue of affordability with some other elements where the member state doesn't have the money to afford the medicine. So for all these different situations, the legislation actually went into proposed measures. So if you allow me, I'll just not go through all of them, but you'll explain very briefly how we saw the proposal, and also that will explain some of the comments that the other panelists have made so far. So a bit on the modulation. I'm happy to see that the modulation is heavily supported in this panel, because indeed our idea was to have something where for the money that the company receive, because the duration of protection is equivalent of money. So for the money that they receive, the patients and the health budgets get the products that they need in all areas where they need it. That was the purpose. So that's why the modulation really basically rewards this extra effort made by the companies. So we want them to go to all member states. Indeed, we thought of a situation where the actual supply is shown. Now the Parliament proposes also some other possibilities, like for example, an obligation to file for pricing and reimbursement. We have thought about that as well. Maybe we had some doubts as to whether this will indeed result in an actual supply or would only stop at some formality level. Of course, some discussion can happen on this as well. But the idea there was really to make sure that the medicine reaches a patient anywhere he or she lives in the EU. That was the objective. Then to the question with regards to the unmet medical need, we indeed want the products to get an additional incentive when they serve that unmet medical need. And the unmet medical need is defined in a way that can be interpreted widely, we believe, so as to support all the needs that we have. And just where it's not for this discussion, but we also have specific rules and yet additional benefits for rare diseases where the situation is even more difficult. Then with regards to the affordability, because that's important, and that also will reply to one of Tille's comments, we have indeed several points that are helping the affordability beyond the modulation. And there, for example, I'm thinking about all the measures that we put to help the generics coming to the market. They will come to the market, of course, at the end of the patent protection of the medicine, but with the provision, the way we redrafted it, they will be able to make all of the necessary tests and work already prior to it. So not only the tests that are needed for the marketing authorization application, but also the ones that are needed for the health technology assessment, and even those that are needed for the pricing and reimbursement. All of this can be done before, so that on day one, after the expiry of the patent protection, they can actually enter the market immediately. And there's quite some delay can be cut, with this provision. Then we have this, information or transparency about the funding. It was very important indeed for us to allow the states and the payers further down the line to be able to understand how much money went into a single product, to see indeed how they can price it. And we have this proposal where we say that for the money that the company received, but we restricted it to the public money. Indeed, they would have to declare. And then with regard to maybe last point here on the affordability, but I think it's an important one, is also we have all these channels now that exist at the level, from the level of the scientific advice, where the companies can already receive the scientific advice of the marketing authorization authorities and of the health technology assessment authority. So it goes quicker, it goes faster, and the process is really more coherent as well. So all of that will hopefully help the member states in achieving their, pricing negotiation, pricing policies in a way that is sustainable to them. But again, and I want to finalize this with this point, the important element that we see is that the modulation of incentives, the way we thought about it and we calculated it, was not to increase the strain on the budget. So we would like more access, but we would like it at the same price as today, because we know that the member states do not have the power, do not have the budget to afford more than that. So if you were to increase that, what the problem would be that maybe indeed some innovation would come, but more member states will be unable to afford it. So in a way, there would be even less access. That is our fear with this playing with the duration of protection, that in other fora is very, very much debated and sought for. So I think with this, I will stop here. Thank you very much.
No, of course. And thanks for setting all of that out. So Julie, let me come back to you then. Lilia made, she sort of set out, the Commission stall, what they try to do, and really, as you said, to help the member states, but also to make sure that access is at the price of today. And I think that's, Lilia, a very important point to note, because obviously we are in all kinds of crises. There's wars going on, there's cost of living crisis, you name it, what's going on. So I think it's really important that you also said that the Commission wants to try to help the member states and make sure that prices stay relatively where they're at today. But Julie, the question is that enough, and can that really be achieved?
Thanks a lot, Mariam. And indeed, we saw great improvements with a Commission proposal to really address inequalities in patient access to medicines. Of course, as said, we can't address everything through the pharma legislation, but we saw some improvement with a reduction of the regulatory data protection baseline, but also with conditional incentives, the greater involvement of patients into the proposals and into the regulatory approval framework. But I would like to say that the one thing that we need to do more is to really not be afraid to put patients at the center of the proposal, and to really embed patients throughout the directive and the regulation. And this is how we can pave the way for better outcomes for cancer patients. And I will give you one concrete example, which also can be reused at national level in different processes. So at EPF, for us, the revision is an opportunity to develop new medicines that better address patient needs. And we can do so, for instance, by integrating patient experience data into the marketing authorization application dossier, or into the assessment of whether and how a medicine meets an unmet medical need. So for everyone to be on the same page, patient experience data include data that are collected to describe patient experience of their health status, symptoms, disease, treatment preference, quality of life, and the impact on healthcare. And they can be collected through patient preference studies, large patient surveys, or in registries. And if we incorporate those patient experience data across the regulatory life cycle, we will ensure that new medicines will better reflect the outcomes and preferences that matters to patients. Because currently, it was a recent study by the Belgium Healthcare Knowledge Center. It found that in Belgium, medicines reimbursed in the country since 2004 for cancer medicines didn't improve survival rates in 6 cancer studies, and only slightly in the other 6. So you really see that we need to go the extra mile to make sure to really put patients at the center and to include the things, the parameters that matter to them. I think we see some improvements with the Commission proposal, but my message to everyone, and also to member states and to parliamentarians, would be to really put patients at the center.
Okay, I'll come to MEP MEPs, because I think Julie was saying lots of things there, especially about the patient experience data. The one question I would put to you though is that when it comes to EU legislation, the EU is obviously legislating for everyone with every country in mind. And when it comes to, key legislations like this that are trying to do so much, where legislation was perhaps too old, too tired, and needed a real refresh, should the legislation do everything, or should it perhaps do what it's doing now and focus on really incentivizing the industry? Because as much as we want the patient to be at the center where they should be, because at the end of the day, each and every one of us is going to be a patient at some time in our lives, the fact is that there are so many areas, especially when it comes to cancer and types of cancer, that simply don't have the treatments. Is the approach better to really use this legislation to incentivize the people that need to make the medicines for us?
Thanks for the good question. I think we can do both, because the legislation is not about incentivizing industry. There are many, many different provisions that have an impact on patients, including cancer patients and their treatment. So if we only focus on incentives, we will miss the big picture, because this legislation is not only about the industry and its incentives. We have a huge provision, for instance, on what can be included, what should be included in the marketing authorization dossier. And that's where, for instance, we can put the inclusion of patient experience data. We also have many provisions on shortages that can improve access to patients. So that's why I think we should not see this legislation only about incentives for the industry, but as a whole that can improve patient access. And I see that there's several hands raised.
Sorry, I was just unmuting there. Perfect. Yeah. So I think Lilia put a hand up first, or would you like Tilly Metz to go first? Is it, yeah? Lilia first, then MEP Metz, please.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to bring two elements. One, but that's an important one, for the because it replies to both Julie and Mariam. We have indeed a provision now in the legislation that allows the EMA to take into account patients' view while they're developing the guidelines, and that is extremely important. And there have been some discussions where there has to be an obligation to invite them, or a possibility. The way the article is drafted, so just to give you an idea, an understanding, is general, and there is reference to several categories of people, including the patients. So the may there refers to the possibility in any given situation to invite any given, interested party, and the patients obviously will be the one mostly interesting party for the definition of guidelines with regards to what unmet medical need is, for example. And there you would have all this patient experience and information that you were referring, that would be obviously taken into account. And another element that I wanted to briefly mention to you as well is that indeed, I'm very happy to hear that the patients are the center of this legislation, and this is how we see it, and this is how the legislation was born to start with. The first article was to say that no medicine can ever be put on the market without it being approved, because the safety of the patient was at stake. So this is exactly the reason behind this legislation. This is its purpose. So we drafted it with this in mind, and including in the consultations and all the processes that we have foreseen there.
Yes, MEP Metz, please go ahead, and then
Okay,
yeah, please.
thank you very much. I want to come back to the one question that you said, what is really the one thing that this legislation also needs to tackle, and also coming back on what Julie was saying, is really to put the patient in the center of our concern. So if we seriously want to improve outcomes for cancer patients, I think we have to look at what this regulation can really do to deliver really this meaningful innovation. Expensive treatment should really be then an added value for the patients, and how to do this. So we really have to look at the evidence requirements for authorizations of medicine. Of course, a big part of this is done at a later stage when we speak about pricing and reimbursement, but we should do this even for authorization. Then we can ask for more. So that's why randomized controlled clinical trials should be a gold standard, and only use a standard of care comparator, not placebo, I mean, as a comparison. So this way we help all the public actors down the line by making sure that we really have adequate evidence that is available, and the decision can be made faster, again, for the benefit really of the patients. That's something I wanted to add here.
Fantastic. Well, listen, I'm really glad that we are having a very holistic debate where we talk about the patients at the centre, and I hope everyone watching is enjoying that. Ward, come to you next. I see your hand is also raised.
Yes, I wanted to react to a few things that have been said. For example, about should the legislation incentivize industry in the first place? I think the legislation should incentivize industry, but it should also give incentives to not-for-profits and to academic development of new drugs. For example, we have not-for-profits who are doing research on drug repurposing. If this research leads to good results, then they should also come on the label of an existing drug. So this research by not-for-profits should also be supported. And when we look, for example, in the field of cell therapy, there we have the very important notion of the hospital exemption, and this makes it possible for hospitals to make a cell therapy available in specific circumstances without a market authorization. And this hospital exemption is very important for diseases with a very low incidence where there is no commercial interest. And so we think this hospital exemption should be, well, it is in the legislation now, but it should be further supported, and it should be accessible for every European patient. And also when a treatment in hospital exemption has a clear clinical benefit and it exceeds the non-routine production, then there should be a kind of trajectory to bring this treatment in hospital exemption also to treatment with an authorization. So there should be a trajectory for this non-commercial development, and to make sure that the non-commercial developed drugs also reach the patients. That's very important for us. And then maybe something that I also wanted to say about affordability. So we think that the modulated data protection systems can indeed bring progress, but we should also be a bit careful, because the total duration of data protection or of protection in the system as it is now is 11 years, and in the new system we go to 12 years. It's and there maybe we see a risk there that this may decrease affordability in some circumstances. Then there is also the tool of the transferable exclusivity voucher, which is a tool to incentivize development of antibiotics. And we are fully aware of the fact that we need new antibiotics, but this transferable exclusivity voucher, according to us, may be a risk for affordability. So there are also some risks for affordability in the proposal as it is now.
Okay, well, I think that is a lot of different things. So what I'll do is I'll allow Lilia to directly respond back to what the things that Ward has just brought up, and perhaps MEP Metz, you could then give the perspective of the European Parliament on the back of that, and anywhere where you think, because obviously you've said that you want to see major changes in this legislation. So where would those changes be based on what you think can be done to maybe, improve the outcomes for patients and put them at the centre of this legislation? Okay, so Lilia first, then MEP Metz.
Yes, thank you very much. So I would like to indeed respond. Actually, I'm very, very happy to hear your comments, because I have this feeling to say, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this. You know, we no, because there is at least the beginning of something for all of these issues that we are bringing, and that's why I'm very happy. So for the non-for-profit, just to tell you, indeed we have. Because, you know, the non-for-profit in theory had always the possibility to become marketing authorization holder. It was not forbidden already. But the way we organize the system now will allow them to do that maybe indeed more often. And for example, for the repurposed medicine, there is indeed now a direct pathway for them if they develop the studies themselves, that they can bring this medicine to the market themselves. So they bring the data to the authority, and then the authority changes the SMPC for the medicine just based on the information that was brought by the non-for-profit. So there we really introduced a direct path for that. And then we also have help for the non-for-profit. They have a special reduction of fees or even waiver of fees from the side of EMA. They have a special treatment in terms of, you know, advice that they can receive. There is also already now, but it's going to be even enhanced, you know, office for help for the non-for-profit. So this was also one of our objectives, to put the hospital research and the all other types of research that is happening at the center of all the development of medicines, because indeed a lot is happening there, and we want to harvest all of this. Now, with regards to the other point that you mentioned, the 11 years as compared to what we have today in the proposal of the Commission. We indeed, why it's so, I'm going to explain very briefly. We made some calculations about the compliance rate. So how many companies would be able to comply with all the conditions in order to get the years. And there the compliance rate varies indeed. For some, it can be up to 60%, for example, for placing on all markets. But in order to get all of the three, it's actually rather low, unfortunately, or in a way, not unfortunately, for the budgets. So we do not think that the 11 years would be achievable by everybody. And we think that when it will be achievable, then it's really something valuable, because the medicine will be put on all member states and will be an unmet medical need, and would also have the comparative clinical trial incentive achieved. So, you know, it would be very, very valuable. And we made the calculations, and all in all, the budget would not have to pay more with what the Commission proposal proposes now than what they're paying today with the existing rules. However, where you're very, very right is with the proposals that we're hearing now in the Parliament, for example, where the duration sometimes is brought to 13.5 years, for example. There we had calculations that this will mean an additional 5.2 billion per year from the national budgets to afford for that medicine. So obviously, then that money will be spent you know, and then some medicine will not be reimbursed, some others will not be available to the patients. So that indeed will be extremely dangerous for the budget. That's why the Commission is defending its original proposal with the original figures, because anything that goes above that would be very detrimental to the national budget. A last point on the voucher. There I'll have to explain to you that basically we do not think that this is going to be very, very problematic for the national budgets, because it's going to be rare. In a way, it's a pity that this is going to be very rare, because it means that there are no developments. There is almost no research in this area, nothing in the pipeline, or very, very little in the pipeline. So our calculations have been made on assumptions that maybe 1 to 2 products would be put on the market. And also, the way the article is drafted is meant to limit it. So it cannot be applied to 10 products. It will have to be applied to the very limited number of products that we indicated there. So the member states would have the money to afford it. Now, why we have it there? It's because the system has failed. Nothing is there. And that is extremely problematic because, as you know, this is one of the challenges of the future. We're very much afraid that this could be the new pandemic. So something needs to be done. And we, of course, work very closely as well with HERA and other, national authorities as well on other ways of helping bringing new antibiotics to the market, the novel ones. So there can be other models, but they would not contradict each other. They would be complementary. So that's how we see the voucher. You understand? It's something that is extremely useful, would be extremely useful. And the last point I wanted to mention, it was on comparative clinical trials, just to say that we also think that having the comparative clinical trial from the beginning would help not only the health technology assessment, so basically the value, so the assessment of the value of that medicine later on in the process, but also the pricing and reimbursement authorities, and even the doctors in their prescription later. So this is something that we incentivize as well, and we would like to make it as wide as possible. However, it's not always possible. That's why we made it as an incentive and not as an obligation.
Okay, I think next to MEP Metz, and feel free to respond, but also to give us the approach that the Parliament is taking. I mean, obviously, as I was saying, and as you know, we all know that there is this divergence that we're seeing between what the Commission obviously is proposing. I mean, it's normal for legislative processes, but there is a divergence. I mean, for example, such an IDP between what the Commission proposes and what the Parliament wants to do. So, yeah, feel free to respond, but also to let us know a little bit, perhaps more in detail, as to where the negotiations are at with the Parliament, and what areas specifically are perhaps the sticking points right now.
Yeah, thank you for giving me the floor again. So when we speak about incentive and market exclusivity and or data exclusivity, I think, sorry, I come back again to my demand that we need real transparency on the cost. I don't know, to be honest, and as they don't put the figures on the table, it's difficult to say how long do they really need exclusivities. And so for me, as long as we don't have really transparency on the developing of medicine on R&D costs and also on the public funding, etc., it's difficult to say how long this exclusivity should be. And which is another thing that is really important, is also that the conditions that go along with those, so the obligation to launch in every member state, etc. So all the points that I said, I can only recommend to you an excellent study that you found about the STOA, which really analyzes which are really the incentives that foster innovation and that also guarantee accessibility and affordability. Because as I said already, what do we have if we have some innovation in the medicines, in the treatment, but nobody can afford it or it's not accessible? So for me, to say it in a very global way, for me, this whole pharma package and pharmaceutical legislation is also there to rebalance the power between the public and the private sector. We really noticed in this whole pandemic how we are delivered or at the stake of the pharma industry and to put the conditions. And I think if something is funded by public money, I think we should be stronger at public authorities. I do perfectly understand also that we have to look at it somehow geopolitically. I mean, how do we make sure that we need also part of real localization of pharmaceutical production, etc. So of course, the market needs to be interesting, but don't forget that we have with 450 more than 450 million people. I think it is an interesting market, and the public authority should be more brave. I mean, in putting also the right conditions when we speak about here the pharma legislation also to put the conditions there. There was something else I wanted to say, but I lost my I lost my fil rouge now, thinking of very different things all together. But I don't want to speak here about the voucher, because I think the AMR, even I totally agree, it's a pandemic that is coming up there. But as we speak here about the cancer treatment, I think yeah, of course I'm really not happy about this voucher, but I say I'll leave it there right now. Thank you.
I can understand that there's lots for both you and Lilia to talk about here, especially because you're both sort of passed with this legislation and trying to get it right. But if I could just come back to it then, for the audience that's watching MEP MEPs, where is the Parliament at? Because I mean, obviously there's always, as I was saying, there's always going to be issues when it comes to legislating and what MEPs want to approve. But where are you guys at? Because the people that are watching this debate, they're wondering, how is this legislation going to start helping me? So could you give us a little bit more understanding of where the Parliament's at?
So you know that that we are still very strong negotiating right now here on the pharmaceutical legislation, that we so far did not find an agreement regarding what should be done regarding the market and data exclusivity. So we're still looking there for a solution, and I try to understand, of course, also those who want more years. But of course, that is not my point, because as I say, I think it's useless to speak about the prolongation. Even some people want more years than we have right now, the current situation, and for me that goes completely against what is in the interest of the patient, and also what is against the public health system. Lilia said it also. It's also a question of what will it cost to the public health system in that case. So we are still negotiating, and I really hope we found a common ground that really puts the patient in the center of the interest, and therefore, again, sorry to repeat myself, if somebody is really pushing for prolongation of the years, having a baseline, but then quite automatically make possible more and more years to be added to that, and then we come out with a situation even with more years possible than we have right now, I must say I honestly have a problem with that. So we are still negotiating, but I pointed now out the main point where we do not agree. I mean, all the people around the table negotiating want to make, I really loved also the presentation of Julie with the 5 A's. So I think the concerns are really there for the most of the negotiator to respect all these A's: affordability, accessibility, adequacy, and make it appropriate. So I don't want to say that there is somebody, but how to go there. There people have different sensibilities and different influences, of course. So yeah, so let's see where we went. So I say in general we aim at the same, but it's the way to go there that are definitely somehow different, and still need to negotiate quite hard on it.
Indeed, you do, because you've also got an election coming up very soon as well. We'll park that issue aside. I'll come to Julie, then we'll come to Ward, because both of their hands are raised, and obviously Lilia, we'll come back to you for the sort of roundup of comments and your thoughts. Okay, so Julie first, and then Ward.
Yeah, thank you, Mariam. I just wanted to come back on the incentive approach and give a bit of a patient perspective. I will also echo what MEP MES said, that innovation is only meaningful if it reaches patients. So we see that the current system has failed to deliver equitable access to medicines across Europe, because, I mean, I'm sure it's not news, but you have some patients in some EU member states having access to the treatment they need 3 years after the marketing authorization. And in some other countries, it will be 3 months. So we have huge disparities across Europe, and we need to fix that. But I mean, as I said, we can't fix everything through the pharmaceutical legislation, but we think that we need to find a good balance between incentivizing research and development of products that provide a real and tangible added benefit to patients and ensuring access to new medicines and therapies across the EU. And on one hand, incentives and conditional incentives for research and development and the marketing of new medicines are important, especially in areas of unmet medical needs. But on the other hand, having very long periods of regulatory data protection will delay the market entry of generics and biosimilars. And we need also to bear in mind that those products, generics and biosimilars, sometimes they are the only way for patients to have access to the medicines. They rely in some countries, patients rely on life-saving generics and biosimilars because they can't access the innovative medicines. So I just wanted to put this into the discussion and what we need to bear in mind, those points.
You know what, Julie, I was literally going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you about, the late market entry of generics and biosimilars. So, based on what you've just said then, so what would be your ask then to the people creating this legislation on those two things?
I mean, our very concrete ask is to have modulated incentives and not go beyond the status quo, because for the baseline regulatory data protection, because as I said, we saw that there is unacceptable disparities within the EU and the current system is not working. So with conditional market incentives, we can hope to have some change and improve patient access across the EU. And on the other hand, we will have faster entry for generics and biosimilars. And on this specific point, we also need to remove all the barriers to make the entry of generics and biosimilars possible from day one, because this isn't currently the case. And I know that in the Commission's proposals, there has been some improvements regarding the faster entry of generics and biosimilars. So yeah, in nutshell, that's our main asks on incentives and generics and biosimilars.
Okay, next we'll get the thoughts of Dr. Ward. I know that you also have some thoughts on it, because I was taking out some quotes of yours where you said, we applaud the reduction of basic regulated data protection periods and provisions for additional periods of data protection, conditions are met. So you've got a lot of thoughts on this sort of stuff as well. So please go ahead.
Okay, what I wanted to say is that for us, transparency is also very important, because we think that if countries have to negotiate about drug prices, they need transparency, but not only about direct public funding. There should also be transparency about tax breaks they have for development. And well, there should be complete transparency about R&D costs. But what I also think is that there should also be transparency about end-user prices that countries pay, because now there is very much confidentiality about that. So there we still need to do a lot more than we do now to make the system much more transparent. And we believe that this transparency is really important for affordability of cancer drugs. So that would be very, very important according to us. And I also have a question maybe for Lilia, if there is some time, about the sandboxes. So the legislation creates sandboxes, and this is for the development of new types of drugs. That is not possible within the current regulatory framework. And so some derogations will be possible to create these new types of drugs. And basically, well, we support this idea of creating such a sandbox, but we also see a danger that it will lead to new generations of drugs with little evidence on the clinical benefit. And I was wondering, how are you going to deal with that risk, to avoid that risk?
Okay, Lilia, please go ahead. There's lots for you to chew over.
Yeah, I will then reply directly on the sandboxes. So on the sandboxes, it needs to be really explained that we do not see it as a permanent measure. It will always be temporary and will then eventually transform itself into a normal authorization, meaning that there would be a phase in the beginning where EMA would assess, and we see whether indeed the medicine or the technology as presented cannot be dealt with under the rules, and then they would come with proposals of how this should be dealt with. Then once the sandbox is established, it will be there for a while, and once the test has finished, the medicine will be authorized, and then when it's going to be authorized, it's going to be authorized under the normal rules, unless it's coupled with another measure that we have in the legislation, which is called adapted pathways, which is basically for example, now we have an example there because there is an annex, and then in the annex there is one example, and that example is on phage therapies, because phage therapies are a difficult animal indeed, and they cannot maybe completely fit under the system, and some adaptations are going to be needed. But this is a different step. You see, normally a sandbox finishes with an authorization, and then that authorization is a normal one with all the guarantees and all the data that is needed, the same as for everyone else. And if after the sandbox it's still considered that an adapted way has to be established for that particular medicine, that it will go for a different process, again with lots of guarantees to ensure that the data is there. So we really don't see it as a playground. We see it as a testing mechanism under enormous supervision on the side of EMA. Yeah. And then if I don't know if you allow me also to bring my remarks in general of what I would like to. Yeah. Okay. So what is important for me, maybe as Commission now to highlight, is indeed the moment is very important, because the Parliament has to reach an agreement on on the text, and either have an agreement or not in this legislature. So we indeed hope that they will reach an agreement. However, we also hope that while doing that, the important purposes of the legislation are not going to be lost. And we already explained them, but my important element here is the following: is that when we want to ensure access in all member states, it's good also to make sure that this is a real one. Again, not a formalistic one, something that has a meaningful impact on the patients, to come back to the patients, because they're the ultimate purpose of the legislation. So if we see something that is a pure, formality, like, for example, filing for pricing and reimbursement without any guarantee of placing on the market afterwards, this might indeed be insufficient to guarantee the objective, especially if the company will get the additional data protection anyway, irrespective of the outcome, because as you know, an obligation is policed only with fines, for example, and this is something that in some situations might be even a risk that the company might want to take, saying, I don't care, I will take the fine. Or even if they do indeed file everywhere, but with the specific idea in mind that a number of countries will never be served anyway, then the measure doesn't serve its purpose. So my ask here would be that if the provisions are changed, of course it will have to be changed to also find the balance between all the asks of all the parties. It has to remain with the objective of ensuring the outcome that was sought from the beginning. Yeah, that would be my ask.
Okay, thank you so much. Lily, I'll park your comments just there a second, because I know that MEP Metz needs to leave. MEP Metz, do you need to leave right now? If so, please do give us your final thoughts for discussion before we move on to sort of the audience Q&A. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I just watched. I didn't follow the time, and at one moment, because I have to be outside for a meeting. That's why I was a little bit. But first of all, thank you very much for organizing this very important topic, and also in that way to raise and to allow the exchange here with different stakeholders and partners. And I think it's very important that you follow on this, and that we all together also connect with the different MEPs to come along with your demands, and also, so for me, it's very important, of course, that we find an agreement before, you mentioned it, Mariam, before the elections, because we don't know how the next parliament will look like and which really they're going to defend afterwards. So I think it's very important that we put the right directions right now for this very, very important. And then you have to think how many years now that this pharma legislation will probably stay. Probably we will not change it afterwards once it's set up for the next 10, 15 years. So we really need to make something that is ready for the future. And so that's why it's really important that through events like this, we come together, we discuss, we also put pressure in order to advance. So that's something I take out of it, and the importance to really listen to the patients, what they really need and what they really ask for. And especially regarding the cancer patient, of course, in this case. So thank you very much for having me, and I'm very motivated, of course, to go on and fighting for what I and the Greens especially believe in here is really, as I said, this general idea of rebalancing the power between public authorities and private. I think we need to work together. Of course, I'm also dreaming of having like a public safe net production of medication really being done by public authorities. We are not there yet. I think BARDA in the United States are stronger there as we are. They are investing also much more there in all that. But I think it's very important, and one last element, that we keep on pushing for a stronger EU public health and EU health union, and therefore it's important not to cut down the budget on this. So, so I finished there now. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you to all these great people around that are working also on this very important pharma legislation. Thank you.
Can I just quickly ask you one thing? There is a question from a lady called Liddy, who basically essentially says, she talks about Article 48 of the legislation, of the regulation, and she says, essentially, are you going to vote for it or against it? Article 48, essentially, she says, allows for the first time ever non-profits to submit a file to EMA, and it will allow repurposed drugs beneficial for patients but lacking commercial drivers to be assessed and become accessible. So she asks, are you going to vote against it or for it?
I mean, for me, I'm just, I of course, I need to speak with my group about every new idea that's coming in now. But for me, of course, if non-profit is going to push and ask for authorization, of course, that goes completely in our direction there that we want to defend. I mean, health should not be an object of commerce. It should be a right, no?
Exactly. And listen, I will now let you go. I just saw that the first question.
Thank you. And sorry that I have to run right now.
No, not at all.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye.
No worries. Okay, so while we let MEP Metz take her leave, Liliana, was there anything else you might want to add? Or I'll give a free hit here to the panelists. Is there anything you'd like to add before we go to the audience questions? Go ahead, please. Lilia first, then Julie, and then Ward.
I'm okay. I think my last ask was indeed the one that I shared before, not to lose the objectives in the negotiations and to be very careful, because every word has a meaning, and you can easily believe that something is achieved while it's not achieved simply through the way it's drafted. So the devil is in the details, and I just hope that the parliament will be very careful at the way they vote, and on the other hand, I really hope that they will have an agreement, because that will mean that the legislation can advance and come quicker.
Thank you so much. Julie and Ward, are there too many perhaps devils in the details? Julie?
Yeah, I think on my side, I would just repeat what I said before, and to truly listen to the patient voice, because this is where the devils can be. Yeah. Because, for instance, I mean, we touched upon many different issues, but as we said, for instance, on unmet medical need, we need to be sure that the definition and the scientific guidelines to be adopted afterwards will really reflect the true and real unmet medical needs of patients as defined by and with them. So I think that what I would again and again repeat is just to have patients involved throughout the negotiations and to really listen to their priorities.
No worries. And there is a question on unmet medical needs from our audience. That's why I've sort of left it there to ask that a bit later. Ward, over to you. Any sort of quick things you want to raise?
Okay. Well, I hope that the good things in the proposal stay there. For example, the modulated incentives, also academic development and a strong hospital exemption. That's very important for us. And maybe some things can be reinforced a little bit. For example, the articles about transparency can be reinforced, we think. It's very short.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we'll now go to our audience then. I've seen that there's lots of questions actually, and they're all quite long as well, but there is one from Elizabeth to Julie, and she says, may I ask Julie to write or repeat the 4 principles? So the ones that you highlighted in the beginning.
Thanks, Mariam. I replied in written to her question, but I can just repeat the 5 principles of access to medicines, but quickly, so we don't lose time for the other questions. So the first one is accessibility. The medicine needs to be available and distributed through reachable channels. The second one, is availability. The medicine needs to be available on the market. The third one is affordability. Patients should not suffer financial hardship, or the same goes for the healthcare systems. The fourth one is adequacy. The medicine should be safe, of high quality and effective. And the last but definitely not least principle is appropriateness. The medicine needs to be appropriate for patients' needs. So yeah, that's in a nutshell our 5 key principles to define access to medicines.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so I'll quickly, because I can see that we've got about 10 minutes left. So let me just go through quickly these questions then. So Ariane says, unmet medical need can be defined differently by patients, their families, than by health professionals and researchers. In this regard, patients and their representatives must be involved in the drawing up of guidelines. So this is something that we, of course, touched upon before. Also, with regard to the clear benefit of medicines, patients and patient advocates want to make sure that patient-reported outcomes are well taken into account to access benefits. What I would say is, I think, who'd like to answer that? Just literally unmute yourself.
I would really quickly answer. I already answered the part that indeed the patients will be listened to while the guidelines are drafted before and while they're drafted. And the second point is that now EMA will have access to real world data. So what is real world data? Is data coming from the use of medicine, and they will be basically users, secondary users of that data. That's going to be extremely interesting, and we have the provisions in the legislation that would allow EMA to take into account that information while they assess the medicine. And of course, since it will also come later, they will also be able to take into account at a later stage. So we see there an immense, improvement in the way that the real data is going to be seen and taken into account by the authorities.
Ward, would you like to perhaps reply on that?
Well, on the question of patient involvement, we also support that, of course. And like many cancer leagues are also funding biomedical research, and my organization in recent years built up experience with a patient commission. So we have a patient commission which is evaluating the research proposals that we receive, and this makes it very clear to us that the involvement of patients in every step of the development cycle of drugs is really necessary.
Julie?
Yes, I just wanted to add to what Lilia said, that the EMA is also conducting work to include patient experience data, so the data I mentioned earlier, and they are currently conducting public consultation with patients' organizations on how to generate, collect, and use this patient experience data. And I hope it will be used in the marketing authorization process and will bring more added value to patients.
Okay, thank you so much. There was a question actually, Leah, I did want to ask you, regarding the role of the European Medical Agency, EMA. We obviously saw in the pandemic that there's so much more that they can do and they can work so much faster. So is this legislation going to help them do that? I mean, in the last, I think, decade, we've had 100 novel cancer medicines approved in the EU. So how much more will their role improve, be emphasized, so that we can see more, perhaps new medicines as well, entering the market a lot faster and getting to those patients?
Yes, indeed, I didn't mention that because as many other elements, I couldn't mention all, but this is the very important one. The timelines are going to be reduced in a quite important way. We reduce it by more or less 30%, but in reality, it's going to be more than that. So we see that today, for example, for medicine, it takes more or less, it depends, but on average 400 days. And with the proposal, the way we see it, it could be around 180, which is more than far more than the 30%. So because indeed there is the legal timeline for the assessment, and then the legal timeline for the authorization, for the actual decision, that's going to be reduced in both situations. But also, we get rid, or we simplify the way, for example, the procedure is run, meaning, for example, if the dossier is not ready, the authority will be able to send it back to the company and reopen when it's ready, which in principle accelerates the procedure, because then the company has a big interest in coming back with the dossier full. So, and also the stops are going to be made easier. Well, all in all, and of course, the procedures are not made shorter without other measures being taken, like, for example, the reorganization of the committees. I'll just give you an example. For some orphan medicine, a medicine had to go through up to 5 committees, and now they're only going to go they're going to be 2 committees, basically. So lots of simplification. Everything's going to be digitalized. That also saves a lot of time to the authority and also to the companies. And so everything has been done to, at the same time, make it easy, make it faster, and make it future-proof.
So I'm just quickly trying to move my finger along to unmute myself. So thank you so much, Lilia. Okay, so we have another question. I think we can do just one last question then. It's quite a long one, so please, panelists, keep listening. So it's from Milan. And they say, we know that we have historical moments, with the elimination of hepatitis B and C to reduce liver cancer. So I think this question is very much focused on liver cancer. To reduce liver cancer, transplantations and transmission still is not on the high level at the European health agenda. Besides the roadmap at EU Cancer Plan, it is also coming. Okay, I'm getting a bit lost in this question. Sorry, Milan, you've written a very long question here that doesn't exactly make sense. I think essentially it's saying what is telling to all of us that we have historically one of the most preventable cancers, but we don't have the filing that would deserve place amongst it. I think essentially what this question, Milan, is asking is, will this legislation help impact the lives of people living with liver cancer? Because I don't think he believes that this is one of the, in terms of screening processes, etc., that this is one of the cancers that is properly targeted for patients.
Well, my quick reply, but maybe someone else will have a better reply, but my quick reply is that this legislation does not touches upon any specific diseases, or so it's general. So obviously it will not influence one disease more than another one. What I cannot say is indeed why liver cancer specifically has no plan or when it will come. But what I know is that the cancer is fight against cancer diseases are still very high on the agenda. You know that the plan is still running, and there are, I think, 36 actions today with projects, and all of those projects are financed through Europe for Health, and they are going to be refinanced in the next mandate as well. So I cannot reply you specifically about the liver cancer, but just I can reassure that the cancers are very high on the agenda and will probably remain so in the next mandate as well.
Okay, thank you so much. And apologies to the audience member, but the question was very long, but I hope I sort of summarized it enough before you. Okay, I think because we've only got 5 minutes left, what I will do is I'll go to Julie, Ward, and then back to Lilia, final comments. And I'll ask you to make final comments framed, you know, within my one question, which is what or can cancer patients really expect that this legislation will help improve their outcomes and access to the medicines and treatments that they so desperately need to, you know, have better outcomes and live a better life. So Julie first.
Thanks, Mariam. And to reply to your question, I think that if the legislation is drafted with the interest of patients in mind and with patients, it can really have an impact for cancer patients. But we also need to be realistic. The legislation will not be applied next year. It will be applied in 10 years. So we will see the outcomes of this legislation in a long time frame. But in the meantime, we need to ensure that it will reflect the needs of patients, especially cancer patients, for instance, on insisting on unmet medical needs, or on the incentives, conditional incentives for the industry. But in the meantime, we also have other EU instruments to improve outcomes for cancer patients and improve access to medicines. We also need to play at the national level because, as we said, not everything can be targeted through the EU pharmaceutical legislation. So my short answer would be we can expect to have concrete improvements for cancer patients, but we need to be patient before seeing them. And in the meantime, we need to work for the legislation to reflect patients' needs.
Thank you so much, Julie. Ward, over to you.
Well, of course, I agree with Julie that we have to be realistic, but I also think that if the legislation is implemented as it looks now, then in the next decade, we may see quicker access to drugs with clear clinical benefits that answer to unmet needs. And I also hope that when the system of modulated incentives is implemented, that this will also lead to more equal access throughout the EU, and that we will see less inequalities when it comes to access to new drugs.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all of your contribution as well. Next, finally, to Lilia, then, please.
Thank you very much. I just I hope indeed that the legislation is first adopted without losing too much of the essence that we wanted to have in it, and even maybe as enriched by some of the good intentions, of the parliamentarians, for example, on some aspects where indeed it can be made even better. And then I hope then once it's approved by the parliament, it also goes through a quick process with the council. So there are many uncertainties still, but what I know is that if it stays as we or as close to the initial project, indeed it will make quite a big difference. We hope on all the aspects that we have discussed today, and specifically for the cancer patients, I hope that and for other unmet needs, we will see more medicines. That's more medicines and more medicines that are targeting the real unmet need. With the also additional element where I would like to see an effort as well is from the member states. meaning that if the modulation is adopted, we would like the member states to also have a very active role in being there, because they will have to engage with the companies. In some member states, they don't have the experience because the companies were not going there for the innovative medicines, or they have very little experience. They would have to really enhance the experience there as well. And if everybody plays its role, the member states and the companies, we could indeed see a much faster and better access to medicines for all patients. And with regards to the shortages management, we didn't discuss that in detail, but there was as well, we could improve the situation a lot with the measures we propose, which would of course then make our life easier in those situations of shortages that we have experienced, for example, in last winter, and more regularly nowadays. Yeah, so that indeed is my hope, rather than my because I don't know how it will look like. Maybe I will just say that I don't believe it will take 10 years. Hopefully when it's adopted, it will go much quicker, but yeah.
Well, yeah, let's just hope it doesn't take 10 years.
Everything crossed, right?
Exactly. Listen, look, guys, I want to thank you all so much. And of course, MEP Metsu was with us earlier. I think this has been a debate where we've, all of you have sort of stated your positions, from your different interest groups and the companies or the industries that you belong to. And I think you've really sort of underlined, where this legislation could go, what it could do, and especially, when we are talking about cancer patients, the effect that it could have, hopefully, for all of them and for the different types of cancers. And, as you were saying, hopefully we have more medicines that do, of course, target those unmet needs, and that people can finally get the treatment that they really do deserve, because, that's what this debate was here to talk about. So I hope that everyone watching has, of course, enjoyed the debate. To all of you speakers, and of course the MAC Interest Group and the ECL Secretariat, thank you so much for allowing us to hold this debate. And to the audience, if you do want to follow the conversation, you can always catch up on the ECL's YouTube channel, where this recording will be made available later on. But, from myself, Mariam Zadi, and from all the organisers, from all the panelists, thank you all so much for being part of this conversation today. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.